Welcome back to another episode of the Former Fat Friend podcast. Today, I am so excited because we have an amazing guest joining us, Jamie Mills, who many of you know on social media as the Sleeved Dietitian. Jamie is an award-winning registered dietitian nutritionist, a best-selling author, and an absolute powerhouse in the bariatric community. After struggling with her weight and PCOS, she made the decision to undergo weight loss surgery in 2017. Since then, she's lost over 135 pounds and completely transformed her life. But what I love most about Jamie is that she's taken her personal journey and turned it into a mission to support and educate others. Through her Tribe membership program, she's helped thousands of women navigate post-op life and find long-term success. She's also one of the first people to openly share about her experience using a GLP1 medication after weight loss surgery. She's had plastic surgery and she is a brand new mom. And we are going to talk about all of her experiences with those things today. So Jamie, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. That was a great introduction. Thank you.
Well, you have just such an amazing story. I think a lot of people already know you because you are such a big part of the bariatric community. But for those who don't, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what that decision was like that led you to weight loss surgery?
Sure. So I've struggled with my weight my entire life. I had childhood obesity, which was always so interesting because my sister never did. And we grew up obviously in the same household, eating the same foods. Some of my family members on my mom's side struggled with their weight, but here I was 10 years old and already over 200 pounds. So my weight was always a topic of conversation. I always, even though my family meant well, and my mom tried really hard to protect me from any negativity, I always felt shame and guilt and was abundantly aware of my weight from such a young age. When I was 14, I was diagnosed with PCOS. So a lot of my weight struggles made sense. I was diagnosed with insulin resistance. I was actually really fortunate. My pediatrician was a newer pediatrician fresh out of school, which was to my benefit because she had learned about PCOS in med school, which not many pediatricians, like old school ones, even really knew about. Like she saw the signs in me and she sent me to, I'm in Connecticut. She sent me to this all day like PCOS clinic that Yale was hosting for adolescents. So in that day, it was like an 8-hour day. I remember going with my mom and I had like an ultrasound, blood work, a glucose test, like met with a dietitian. So at that moment, when I got that diagnosis and I learned about it, it made sense why I struggled with my weight. But it wasn't particularly helpful because no one really knew what to tell me other than to eat less. So I had many experiences with dietitians back in the day that, weren't great. They were all nice enough, but they couldn't really help me other than tell me to stop eating so much, which oftentimes I wasn't even eating enough because I would overly restrict. And I got to a point in high school. I don't know my exact weight because I wasn't weighing myself, but based on my recorded highest weight versus, clothes I was wearing then and whatnot, I'm pretty sure I was pretty close to 300 pounds. I'm barely 5'4" for reference, so that was a lot. And I got to a point where I kind of felt like, well, what's the point in trying? I have this condition and nothing works, so why bother? And it wasn't till college. And at the time, I was actually going to school for English and secondary education to be a high school English teacher with a minor in art. So that was my background. Okay. Yeah, that was my background before dietetics. But I was at college and I remember getting to a point where I was like, you know what? Like, even if I never lose another pound for the rest of my life, I have to do something and take control of this because I cannot keep gaining like this. I was uncomfortable. I was very depressed. I wasn't socializing or dating or anything that you should be doing when you are in your late teens, early 20s. So I started really focusing on my health and getting really interested in nutrition and started going to the gym and getting into a routine. And I had lost 50 pounds that year in a pretty healthful way.
Wow.
And then it kind of took a turn for the worse and it became less healthy and more obsessive. I lost an additional 20 pounds, so 70 total. And that last 20 was really unhealthy, very restrictive, very disordered. I ended up going to therapy and getting a lot of help for that. And when I made it out the other side, I realized I wanted to help other people who struggled with their weight, so that they didn't have to kind of go down this dark path that I went down. And that's when I transferred to a different college to study dietetics. I set myself back in school like 3 years.
Oh,
Because one of
wow.
the questions I get a lot is, Jamie, did you decide to become a dietitian after surgery? And the answer to that
Yeah.
is no. I was almost done with schooling to be a dietitian when I decided to have surgery. So I went through all of like my bachelor's degree and I was into my internship year, which is like our clinical rotations year. And I finally decided, you know what? Because at this point I was back up at my highest weight. I was doing everything I could possibly think of, practicing all the things I was learning in school. I'm like, I've done everything to take control over this and I'm still struggling. And that
Yeah.
was really when I decided I needed another tool.
Mhm.
And at the time in college, even amongst my professors and all the things that we learned, no one really talked about obesity itself as a disease. They talked about all the diseases that come along with it and comorbidities, but they didn't really talk about it as a disease. So I ended up having surgery in 2017. I had VSG. It was the scariest decision. I felt incredibly alone. I felt incredibly isolated. I felt very hypocritical. I'm like, here I am becoming a dietitian and I need surgery. I can't even help myself. How am I supposed to help other people? So it was a lot
Yeah.
of mindset stuff. But ultimately, I ended up having surgery. I ended up finding the Instagram community. And at the time, I had a different Instagram handle. I didn't tell anyone I was in school to be a dietitian. It was funny.
Oh, really?
I felt like an outcast amongst my peers in school because I'm like, many thin, women who are going to school to be dietitians, and here I am having weight loss surgery. And then on the flip side, I didn't really want to tell this community that I was going to be a dietitian because one, I already felt like, am I going to be a bad dietitian because I'm struggling myself? No one's going to want to work with
Mm.
me. That was kind of my mindset. But also, I didn't want to intimidate other people because many people have had poor experiences with dietitians. So I didn't want
Mhm.
people to not be my friend because they knew what I was going to school for. Because I genuinely just wanted to make friends. Because up until this point, I never even met another surgical bariatric patient. I didn't
Oh,
know
wow.
any person who had even had surgery. And in 2017, the Instagram community just isn't, it wasn't what it is now. So I ended up connecting with some people who were local. Some of these girls, we met up at like a local weight loss surgery meetup. I was so scared, so nervous, but went to dinner with a bunch of them. And I was only 3 weeks post-op and I was
Oh
still
my
on
gosh.
purees. I couldn't even really eat anything, but everyone was so nice and so welcoming. And a couple of the girls I met that night are still like my best friends to this day. I still text them. They came to my wedding. I went
Oh.
to one of the other girls' weddings this fall. So that really changed the game for me. And then as I went along on my journey and got more confident, I finished up my I finished up my clinical rotations. I sat for my board exam. I became a dietitian. And that was when I changed my Instagram handle. And I was like, at that point, I think I had like maybe 5,000 followers on Instagram, which back in 2018, that was like a decent amount. Instagram wasn't
Yeah.
what it is like now. And I
Yeah.
remember being like, hey guys, like, surprise, I'm actually a dietitian. Like, I think this is kind of cool, so I figured I'd share. And then I just
Yeah.
started posting more nutrition things, and I got this almost immediate response of, oh my God, can I work with you? Hey, can like you help me? Hey, like my dietitian at my weight loss surgery center, she's nice and all, but like you get it. And I was like, wait, people actually would want to work with me. They don't think like I automatically would suck because I like needed my own like help. Like that was my own
Yeah.
limiting belief at the time. But I
Yeah.
always wanted to own my own private practice. I initially thought I'd work with PCOS patients. I didn't
Mhm.
even think that this would be my specialty. I ended up choosing this as my specialty in my clinical rotation. So I did have
Okay.
that background, but I
Okay.
really thought like professionally, like moving forward, I would still work with PCOS patients, which of course I see many people with PCOS at this point. But ultimately, I just fell in love with this community and my own struggles, my own feelings of isolation and feeling like I was cheating or like this outcast, and that need for community made me want to do better for other people. I
Mhm.
also learned firsthand how unrealistic and how bad some of the diet advice is amongst surgical centers. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking like, wow, I'm going through this pre-op process. I have my degree in nutrition and I'm overwhelmed. Like I made a second appointment with my dietitian just for the lesson that we had on vitamins, because at the time I was so overwhelmed with trying to figure out how to make all these, because they didn't have like bariatric one-a-days really back then. It was like, you have to have this much vitamin D, make sure you're checking this. Like it was, everyone was like kind of on their own, checking their own labels and stuff, which I still do for people now. But at the time I was like, this is overwhelming. How in the world is someone who doesn't have this background understanding this? Because I'm struggling. I was like, how can I make this easier for people? How can we streamline this? Or, everyone is just handed this binder or this packet saying, here, go forth and learn. Like, here's your post-op diet. It's good for up to 4 weeks. Nothing else for the rest of your life. Good luck. And I'm like, that doesn't work for anyone long term. There's no support going forward. Like after surgery is when you need the most support, actually making the changes. So that's really where I set out to figure out ways that I could provide support and services to people so that they could ultimately have a better experience than I had had.
Yeah, that's such an amazing story. And I think your perspective is so unique. I really, so I was one of those patients that was given 4 weeks of food and then it was like, well, then, just see how it goes. And it's like, wait a second, like, what do I do after a month of this? I'm curious though, because I hear all the time that people have bad experiences with the dietitians at their surgery centers or their bariatric dietitians. Do you think that there's a disconnect between the education that you received as a dietitian and what you actually experienced as a bariatric patient that might lead to some of those bad experiences people tend to have?
Yes. 100%. So bariatrics really is a specialty unless you choose to. So when you go to school to be a dietitian, there's this big year called the internship year. It's a really crummy name for it because it's not just an internship. It's literally like your residency. It's 1,200 supervised practice hours in different various clinical settings. We all do, long-term care, acute care in the hospital, food service, school nutrition. Like there's lots of things that we all do, but then there's a couple of weeks where there's leeway where you can choose a specialty. And a lot of people choose things like eating disorders, corporate wellness, pediatrics is its own specialty. Like I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Like that is its own like field essentially. I chose bariatrics, and funny enough, and not a lot of people know this. So at the time I was in my community nutrition rotation. I was with a dietitian who actually ended up in my wedding. Like we became best friends. We were at the same age. She was my preceptor, but she worked at ShopRite. So ShopRite has dietitians at the grocery store. I loved that rotation. And she knew about my surgery at the time because I told her I was newly post-op. And she was a huge support to me. And she's like, one of my friends I went to college with is a dietitian at the bariatric center, like a few towns over. You should see if you could do your specialty with her. She's wonderful. She had also gone to our college. So she graduated like a year ahead of me. So I requested her from my clinical director. I was like, hey, like I heard this dietitian is great. She went to school here. Could I possibly do a rotation with her, at the bariatric center? And lo and behold, that dietitian is Haley, the Awkward dietitian.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've had her on the podcast. I know you know her.
Yeah.
So she was actually my preceptor for the bariatric rotation.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I got to work alongside Haley for, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks. So I took on her patients. Like it was just like really cool. At the time, neither one of us were working like in this field in the bariatric space online, but I just, feel the need to credit her a little bit there too, because she taught me so much of what I know. But unless the point of this is, unless you choose this as a specialty, you don't really learn about bariatrics. There's like a page about like what surgery is essentially in your clinical like MNT, medical nutrition therapy, like textbook that we have. But it doesn't really talk about the lifestyle, the changes, the stigma. It doesn't talk about even the protein needs. It really just talks about the surgical procedure itself. And one of the things that I actually did on 3 separate occasions, all prior to COVID, one of my professors, I got to tell this story real quick. One of my professors asked me to come back to be a guest speaker about bariatrics, but I shifted the way I talked about it. So I went back to the classroom. I was the guest expert. And the way I presented myself is like, hey, I'm Jamie. I'm a bariatric dietitian. I didn't tell them I had surgery. And at the time I had lost all the weight. So here I am, this stereotypical like thin dietitian, just like everybody else. And I shared all about bariatrics. I shared like what it is. I talked about the stigma. And then I did this on 3 different occasions. I invited the students to tell me what they thought about surgery and what they thought about surgical patients.
Whew.
I let them just unleash all of their bias. A lot of them said, I think surgery is barbaric. I think that it shouldn't be like, I just think it's crazy. I can't believe people get their stomachs cut out. I just think that they need to stick to the diet better. And I'm like, okay. And I just kept I let them put their foot in their mouth on purpose. And then I said, I want you to watch this video. And then on the screen, what I ended up playing is a video of me talking. I documented a lot of my pre-op journey even before I was actively posting it on social media. And I have this one video in particular where I'm talking about how, and I've shared it on social media before, but where I'm talking about how one of the medical assistants at my bariatric center actually like made fun of me. And it was a really horrible experience. And I left there like crying. But at the time I was, at my heaviest weight. And what's so funny is it takes everyone like a solid, like almost 2 minutes into the video for them to go, oh, wait a minute, this is you. And then like the horror on their face, like the absolute horror. And I'm like, okay, so I'm like, all right, so now let's really talk about this. And then we talk about like the bias and the stigma, and the care you give to patients matters, and the way you talk to them matters, and the way you judge them matters. Like, these are humans, these are people. Like, this was me. And then they're able to see how much this can help. And I've had students come back from that lesson saying that was absolutely like life-changing for me in like my dietetics journey. So there's a huge disconnect when it comes to the empathy. There's a huge disconnect when it comes to the understanding. While there are many dietitians who have struggled with their weight, and it's kind of a known thing that a lot of dietitians get into the field because of struggles with disordered eating. I can't generalize and say all, but a great amount of them, while their experiences are 100% valid in struggles, it seems to be that most of them struggle with under eating type tendencies in already thin bodies where it might have impacted them differently, as opposed to someone like myself who was struggling with similar things in an already like obese body. So I think it really, there's a lot of judgment and a lot of weight bias. And I talk about that in my book a lot, not just with dietitians, but other healthcare professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's really, brave of you to put yourself out there as this kind of example, but I think it's such a powerful one because I've always said that I think there's no one who understands more about eating healthy than an obese person. And the perception of the world is that people are obese because they just are, eating Oreos and pizza all day long and they don't know how to lose weight or they can't stick to it. And I just don't think that's true. I really think for most obese people, they've tried more diets than anyone else in the world. And I think you're such a great example of that. It wasn't a lack of knowledge or trying. It was something biological with your body and your brain that prevented you from being able to lose the weight. And I think that's so powerful and such a powerful message that people need to hear, that it's not about a lack of knowledge. It's not about a lack of willpower. It's so much more than that. And some people do just need medical intervention. Actually, I'd argue most obese people need medical intervention.
100%. I tell my clients that a lot too. I was talking to them on our group coaching call today. I'm like, you are smart, capable women. Like, and when I coach, like I do different, like teach back methodologies to make sure I know that they're understanding the knowledge. About like 90% of the people I work with know what they need to do, like to a T. That's not the issue. The issue is, again, there's biological factors, environmental factors, emotional factors, mental health factors, past trauma, coping mechanisms, impulsivity, ADHD and neurodivergency. Like there's so many things that make up the puzzle pieces of obesity, as I like to call it, and everyone's puzzle pieces look a little bit different. And what tools you utilize are going to look different as well. but obesity as a whole is just so stigmatized, and people like to think that those of us who struggle with our weight are just lazy and don't care about our health and just, sit on the couch and eat all day, when, like you just said, nothing could be further from the truth. Every person who's had surgery has tried it time and time again to lose weight. We don't need to be told just eat less.
Yep. Yeah, actually, we had Laura Grabo on last week. She's a bariatric therapist, and she challenged us to rethink how we even use the word obese, because her point was that, we don't refer to other people with chronic diseases by the name of their disease. Like, you don't call someone a rheumatoid arthritis or a hypertensive or whatever. But even the fact that we call people obese is indicative of how stigmatized that
100%.
that term and that condition is. I'm curious if you noticed a shift in your dietetics community about when people really started thinking about obesity as a disease rather than maybe a symptom of other diseases or a cause of other diseases, or has that shift happened?
I'm going to argue that in the dietetics field as a whole, that shift not only hasn't quite happened, unless you're talking to dietitians like myself and others who specialize in bariatrics or medical weight loss. Otherwise, the dietetics field is heavily divided right now. Within our field, if you go on Instagram and search for dietitians, you're going to see a lot of dietitians that label themselves as anti-diet dietitians, Haze dietitians, health at every size dietitians. And I talk about this in my book too. I have a real problem with not all these dietitians. I think most of them even, do great work for the women and people that they serve and support. However, an intuitive eating, gentle nutrition approach does not work for every person. And it's gotten to a point where it's gone from this gentle nutrition, anti-diet approach to an extreme. And we're seeing a lot of rhetoric, especially in social media, where it has now become more anti-weight loss. There are so many dietitians, unfortunately, who are anti-intentional weight loss. And the intuitive eating framework as a whole is against intentional weight loss. So while I think that some of the principles within the intuitive eating anti-diet framework are beautiful and wonderful, listening to your body, having all foods fit, stopping when you're full, they basically say that intentionally trying to lose weight is bad. And that is something I can't get on board with, especially because we know that that's not true. And weight loss is not always a bad thing. Can it become a bad thing if you're talking about, under eating and restricting? Yes, of course. But the reason I have an issue with this too is all dietitians are anti-diet culture. We're anti-diet culture. Doesn't mean we're anti-dietary changes when warranted to support you in whatever your disease is, which is essentially what dietitians do. So some dietitians provide what's called medical nutrition therapy, MNT. So if you are someone who has diabetes, you'll see a dietitian who will help you with a consistent carbohydrate diet to manage your blood sugars. If you are someone with heart disease, you'll see a dietitian who will help you with a lower sodium, lower fat diet to manage your heart disease. Why should obesity be any different? And why are we telling people who are struggling that it's bad? And it's also kind of wrapped into some of the body positivity movement and rhetoric, where part of it, again, we're seeing extremes. And the reason I tie the dietitians into this, based on your original question, is there's just a lot of dietitians on social media taking it to an extreme, unfortunately, where they're saying, you shouldn't intentionally be losing weight. You shouldn't ever be telling yourself no to food. You shouldn't have, and while we don't want to overly restrict in a disordered way, we do need to have boundaries with some of our choices, especially if we're someone trying to lose weight for honestly whatever reason, but specifically for our health. And I think it's incredibly dismissive, especially because so many of the dietitians in this field are in thinner bodies and always have been. It's incredibly unfair to tell someone who is morbidly obese that they shouldn't intentionally desire weight loss. So that's where, when we talk about obesity as a disease, we're seeing that brought to life in the bariatric spaces, both with medical and surgical weight loss. And I first really started to grasped that concept myself when I went to the ASMBS conference in 2022, which wasn't even that long ago, but that was the conference where it really sunk in. Like, this is a disease. These surgeons, these dietitians, these nurse practitioners here, they're all here because they're helping treat this disease state and taking the shame away. So I feel like unless you are someone within any of these professions who is working with these patients, there's still so much judgment and misinformation even within this field in different niches, because they're not seeing these patients firsthand. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is an anti-diet, like anti-weight loss dietitian. I love her. And what she does for her community is beautiful. But we had a really cordial conversation at one point in time because, you know, the people she works with, I asked her, I was like, out of curiosity, what's like the highest BMI you've seen like amongst your clients? And BMI is flawed for many reasons, but for the sake of this example. And I think she's like saw a couple people with a BMI of like 40 or 42. I'm like, at this very moment, one of my clients has a BMI of 76 and is unable to walk downstairs to do her laundry.
Yeah.
The people we are working with are not the same. So maybe telling someone, which we shouldn't be telling dietitians these things anyways, we should be letting people draw their own conclusions and supporting them in healthy ways. Yeah. But if I were to tell my client who has a 76 BMI is unable to walk down the stairs to do her laundry and just wants to be able to comfortably get out of bed, you should just eat intuitively and move in a joyful way that feels good for your body. That is so dismissive when she's living in chronic pain. So this is where like I can talk about this like all day, but I talk a lot about this in my book too, because I don't think the majority of the dietetics profession is grasping the concept that obesity is a disease. Some are still rejecting that idea, which you can't argue it. It's science. It's clinically defined as a disease. And many people in those spaces will also say that the word obese or obesity is like a slur. And like, you'd probably see that on some of those types of pages too, where I use the term quite often. And I hear what Laura is saying with, you know, taking that out of our vocabulary or being mindful of it because we don't want to label ourselves as such. But I use it often to try and destigmatize it. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm constantly saying obesity is a disease. Obesity is a complex disease. It's not a moral failing. So you got me kind of on a tangent now, but I just get so passionate because it just like, it frustrates me to no end that not enough people are accepting of the fact that it's a disease that is worthy and deserving of treatment, just like any other.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little different, but I think the name of our podcast, Former Fat Friend, is an attempt to also destigmatize the word fat because there's no reason why that word should hold so much emotion. It's a descriptor of what your body physically looks like and a disease state that you might have. It has no moral value, right? And so if you're ever curious our thoughts on why we called this the Former Fat Friend podcast, you can go back to our very first episode and listen to it. But I'm totally with you with trying to kind of destigmatize those terms. I had never really thought about the role of dietitians in the body positivity movement. And I think that's so interesting because this is something that I struggle with a lot too, which is, you know, I wish I had felt good about myself when I was obese. I didn't. I never felt good in my own skin. I never felt good about my body. And I am so happy for people who do. And I think that's an amazing thing if we can give people the ability to feel good at the state that they're at. At the same time, I had a BMI of 37 when I had weight loss surgery, and I can't even begin to list all of the things that have improved with my quality of life and my health from losing weight. So it's a catch-22 because I think on the one hand, I wish that, 37 BMI version of Casey felt a lot better about herself. But at the same time, I'm so glad I was able to find weight loss surgery as a solution as a treatment for this disease because it has made such significant impacts on my quality of life. And I think we do people a disservice if we tell them, you don't need to change, you're fine. You just need to, eat what you want, find joy in movement, do what makes you feel good. Because even if you're not the, 76 BMI and you can't walk down the stairs, there are so many things in life that are harder when you are a heavier person and in a bigger body.
And sometimes I agree with everything you just said. And sometimes you don't even realize what those things are until you go through it. So again, like I
Yeah.
was a child with obesity. So I never knew what it felt like to not be in a big body. And like I to this day, and I'm not at my lowest. I am postpartum, like we mentioned right now. I'm 5 months postpartum. I regained during pregnancy, so I'm back to losing weight, which is going well, slow but well. But even still, with some of this, postpartum regain, I still am so thankful for the non-scale victories that I have every single day. And I always say like the best non-scale victories. I'm a Disney adult. I love Disney World. So like when I go to Disney, like I can like it starts the moment I go. I can wheel my suitcase through the airport without getting tired. I can walk on the airplane, and yes, the non-scale victory of being able to buckle your seatbelt is great, but do you know which one I love even more? I love walking down the middle aisle, like to get to your seat on the plane without having to do that little scooch thing to get, like, I could just walk through and not have to like be in the way. People don't see me coming and go, oh gosh, I got to sit next to her.
Yeah.
I am able to go to Disney World and walk for, 22,000 steps in the day and not be tired. I can walk into all the merchandise stores and buy whatever sweatshirt I want because I know I can find it in my size. I can go on the rides. And also, I've gotten to a place where I can enjoy the food moderately, but the trip is not about the food and only the food.
Yep.
And I'm able to have better experiences. So that's just one of like thousands of examples of all the good things that have come from this. But unless you've been in a larger body, you don't know how much it hurts to walk around. You don't know how sucky it is to go into, your favorite store at Disney and not be able to get a freaking sweatshirt because there's none that fit you. Like these things are so hard and they weaken your self-esteem and confidence. And even if someone, on paper, let's say someone, is morbidly obese, but on paper is still technically healthy. They don't have diabetes. They don't have high cholesterol. Like technically it's just the weight. If you don't feel good mentally or emotionally or physically, even if, on paper, clinically, you're healthy, you're still not healthy. And your reasons for wanting surgery and to not live in a big body are valid. And I take a holistic approach with all my clients, really working on all aspects of our health and wellness, not just, I focus a lot on the wellness wheel, which is like the 8 dimensions of wellness. Physical fitness and nutrition are only 2 of the 8 dimensions. So we talk about all of them, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, occupational wellness. There's all these other wellness like tiers. But if you don't want to go out and socialize because you're ashamed or you just feel terrible about yourself, or like I did, where I didn't want to make friends, I didn't go out on dates, I didn't like do anything other than go to work or go to school, like if it's impacting your quality of life, that is valid enough reason to want to change. And this might be a super unpopular opinion and people might get real mad at me for saying this, but if you simply feel like you would be more confident and feel better in your appearance losing weight, you're allowed to want to lose weight for that reason too. So many people are so hesitant to say like, I just feel better about myself. Like, I feel like I look better. I feel like, I like the way I look in my clothes better. And I agree with you. I never was able to attain that level of confidence in a larger body. And I so wish I had, because everyone deserves to feel good no matter their body size. And this is not an attack on anyone else, but if you individually as a person don't feel good in your body, you are allowed to change it and you don't need to justify your reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think, as you were talking, I was thinking about how I think so many people who struggle with obesity spend so much energy and time trying to cover up the struggles from other people, right? So like if you're out, walking with friends, you're, huffing and puffing, trying to keep up and trying to, make sure they don't see how much you're sweating and how much you're struggling. And so I think maybe part of that, people not understanding why living in a bigger body is so difficult is because we do spend so much time hiding how difficult it actually is. And it's really hard to know unless you've been there. But there are so many things. And I feel like I'm 3 years out from weight loss surgery. So I'm not, not super far out, but it's been a while. But there are things every day that I realize are non-scale victories. Like this is so random, but I used to never be able to wear necklaces because my hair chronically, well, one, they were too short, but it would always get tangled in the back. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I realized it doesn't happen anymore. And I was thinking about it and I'm like, oh, I think it's because I used to have like more fat back there. So it kind of created like a little like smushed roll of fat between my necklace and my hair. And then it would always get tangled and it doesn't happen anymore. And it's like stuff like that. Or like I can wear heels without being in pain. Stuff that I never even knew was related to my weight.
100%. I could never walk in heels before, and now like I love wearing heels, and it makes me feel good to wear heels. And I always have, well, even to this day, after like weight loss, I still have like shorter, like pudgier fingers and like feet, so I always had to get like double wide shoes, which is like annoying. But like my ring size was like a size 10. Like I could not ever wear rings. And I think prior to getting pregnant, because everything swelled up and I just finally can get my rings back on, which is so exciting. That was like my non-skill victory I posted on Instagram last week. I'm like, my rings fit again. But I had when my husband proposed, my wedding ring was like a size 8. We got it sized down, I think, to like maybe a 6, like pretty small. So going from like a 10 to like a 6 ring size was like crazy. Like I already got it sized smaller, so then it was super frustrating when I was pregnant and they didn't fit. But like that's such like a cool, like I can go out to any store. Like I love Francesca's, that store I always thought had such cute accessories. I could actually buy a ring there if I want to, just because it's cute and I know it'll fit, because they actually have ones that fit me. Like it's such simple things that people in large bodies don't get to experience, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also really appreciate the fact that you said if you want to lose weight because you think it will help you feel better about how you look, that's okay. I think one thing that I struggle with sometimes is I almost feel like I need to justify to people why I had weight loss surgery, because I was a lower BMI. I mean, I was 240 pounds, so I was clinically obese. But I always feel like I need to say like, oh, well, I was pre-diabetic and I had high cholesterol. So like, that's why I had weight loss surgery, which is true. I did have those things and I reversed those things, and that's amazing. But I also wanted to feel better about how I looked, and I wanted to feel more confident. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I feel like so, and I followed your journey for such a long time on Instagram, and I love the things that you talk about. And I follow a few other people who have like lower starting BMIs, and those journeys are just as valid. So I think there's room for improvement even amongst our own community, because on the one hand, and this is where we've tried to balance a lot of things out in my membership program to make sure everyone feels welcome and included, because we have, people who do start off at 500 pounds in my program. So it's really frustrating to them when they see someone who started out at 190 pounds who is, struggling to get to their goal weight. And sometimes they're like, well, your starting weight is my goal weight. So like we have to be really mindful, especially in my program, about how we talk about our own bodies in a room full of other people, just because everyone's starting points are so different and everyone's struggles are different. But just because they're different doesn't mean anyone's is more valid than the other. Because I think also when I think shaming people with lower BMIs for having surgery further stigmatizes obesity. It's almost like saying, well, you're not obese enough.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, and that's not fair.
Right.
Like it's not fair. And I think, and I hope it's okay to bring this up, but I know like you shared some people not being so nice to you on your Instagram about like where you're at now in your journey. People have feeling like it's okay to make comments on your body because now you're in a thinner body, and it's not okay to make judgments say anything about someone else's body, regardless of if you are in a larger body or not. So I think kind of you get shit no matter what sometimes. It's really sucky.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, I mean, obviously the comments now are like, like the total opposite end, right? Where it's like, oh, you've gone too far, you're too skinny. But if I've learned one thing in this whole process, it's that obesity is a disease. And I don't think we have that much control over where our weight ends up one way or the other.
100%.
And so if you are someone who has ever been obese, has ever struggled with your weight, has had bariatric surgery, you understand that you didn't have full control over that weight that you were then. I also don't have control over where my body chose to settle now.
Mhm.
And as long as I'm healthy, which I am, and I feel good, I don't think anybody should be judging, where you end up, whether that's on the lower end of the spectrum or the higher end. It's kind of, you control the factors that you can control, and a lot is outside of our control.
I would agree with that. And that definitely came true for me during my pregnancy. Again, I keep referring to it because that was like my most recent experience that completely turned my world upside down. But it was really challenging to go through weight gain again after all of that. And during pregnancy, like I didn't expect to gain nearly as much as I did. And it was completely out of my control. Like there was nothing, and that complete surrender of control from someone who's always been kind of a control freak and who has always been trying to manage her weight was really challenging.
Yeah. Well, you struggled a lot with like food intolerances during your pregnancy.
Yeah. So my son is just turned 5 months old. I had him in June. He came a month early. Little guy got evicted at 36 weeks. It was a wild ride. But it was this time last year that I got pregnant, and I started feeling sick around 5-6 weeks. So really early in my pregnancy, I ended up with something called hyperemesis gravidarum, which is a really fancy word for excessive vomiting. So it's basically extreme morning sickness. It's not just a little bit of feeling nauseous in the morning or at night. It was severe nausea morning, noon, and night the entire pregnancy. It was the only way I can describe it is it felt like a stomach bug that lasted the whole time. So I ended up having to go, and I kept like waiting to write out the first trimester. Like everyone says it gets better. Everyone says it gets better. I was throwing up like 8-9 times a day. And just a wreck of a human. Like I couldn't function. Awful. It was so bad. I remember having a couple of client calls literally saying, I gotta go, and like running off to like throw. It was so bad. Man. I threw up everything, including ginger ale and toast. I'm like, who throws up plain toast? It was so gosh. Bad. Water would make me projectile vomit. Water of all things. I was like, what? I was like, baby, we need water. Like, what do you mean? So I ended up having to go on like 6 different anti-nausea meds around the clock. I was on Diclegis and Reglan and Zofran and Pepcid and like all these things. And we finally got the vomiting under control. So by like 20 weeks, I wasn't vomiting every day. I still would throw up periodically and up until the very end. Actually, I threw up laying down on my back on the C-section operating room table. So that was real fun. Oh my
gosh.
Yeah, It was real fun. All that to say, so once the vomiting like stopped, maybe you might want to put a little trigger warning on this podcast that I talk about throwing up, because I know that can really be triggering for other people. But I was able to get that under control, but I was so nauseous morning, noon, and night. Mm-hmm. It never went away. Almost nothing made it better. And I had such severe food aversions. So everything was disgusting. Everything was disgusting. I don't think I could eat meat or protein my entire pregnancy. Like it was so bad. Oh, I went from working out and going to CrossFit 5 days a week to barely getting out of bed. So I thought I was going to be that cute pregnant girly at the gym lifting her weights. Nope, absolutely not. Couldn't lift my head off the pillow. Yet somehow I still managed to gain 70 pounds during my pregnancy. And I'm really bitter about it because I would have been okay with it if I was at least eating good. I didn't get to eat or enjoy anything. So some people with hyperemesis do, and I will say there's like different severities. I'm very fortunate. Like many people who get hyperemesis end up, I was hospitalized a few times for it for dehydration, but so a lot of people get hospitalized all the time, have to be on at home like TPN and hydration and
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it gets really severe. Some people, like, I was very fortunate that we at least got mine under control. But the only food, this is like literally the only thing I ate my whole pregnancy. For whatever reason, Cliff bars, which are like those energy bars, they're not really protein bars. They're pretty calorically dense. But for whatever reason, those never made me throw up. And I was never, ever, ever a soda drinker, even before surgery. The only thing, and I could like, I keep thinking about it now, it grosses me out. The only thing I could keep down for fluids was Coke full sugar Coke, which as a bariatric patient, I'm like, I can't drink this. But it was the only thing that got me any relief. And my OB was like, you have to, if that's the only thing you can drink, that's all you can drink. So I definitely gained weight from being inactive, eating high carbs whenever I did eat, and drinking soda, because that was the only thing that didn't make me sick or would like ward off the nausea. So it was a really miserable time. And like I said, I could have been okay with the weight gain if I was at least eating good food. I was we went to Disney for a baby moon. I was determined. I was like, I don't care how sick I am. We are going to Disney. Bad idea. Disney, pregnant and sick, not fun. I was in one of the restaurants the first day we were there, and I started to feel sick, and there was no bathroom in the restaurant because it was in a hotel. So it was like around the corner. So guess who got sick in the middle of the restaurant, 6 months pregnant, trying to run out? Me. It was just, as a whole, it was like not a good experience. But my reason for sharing all this is that was the first time in my life I had to completely surrender all control. I could not control my weight. I could not control my food choices. I was in pure survival mode. And to be honest, I'm still like mentally and emotionally healing from that at this point, because that's how traumatic my pregnancy experience was.
I would imagine, as someone who has had bariatric surgery, lost a lot of weight, you probably went in to pregnancy with a very different idea of like how you were going to, Oh
my goodness. I was like, I can't wait to feed my baby healthy foods. I'm going to do my best to stick to my routine and make sure I'm still going to the gym, because exercise, as long as you've already been doing it, is so healthy during pregnancy. I can't wait to, keep up with my routine. And this is going to so many people don't talk about negative pregnancy experiences, because I think there's a lot of shame and guilt around that. I also developed, and this was very highly correlated to the sickness itself, but I didn't know this was a thing. You can get antenatal depression. So antenatal depression is apparently this, I know this now because I had it, is essentially like postpartum depression, but during pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
I really felt like my pregnancy like changed me as a human. I've never suffered with clinical depression like that before. I had really dark, really awful thoughts. It was incredibly isolating. Anyone who like knows me in real life was like, you are a shell of yourself. Like, we don't know who you are. So it was a really rough time. So especially after getting to a point in my journey, especially right before this, I published my book. I was at my leanest weight. I was doing all sorts of cool things at CrossFit. Like I was doing handstands and starting to learn to do like pull-up, like so many non-skill victories. Like I felt so strong, so healthy. So it was crazy that I got to this point, like the epitome of health, and then got so sick and came crashing down. Like I felt kind of on top of the world before that with all these things. And I'm a very goal-driven person. I couldn't even get out of bed. It was horrific, and I did not feel like myself. But it taught me a lot about surrendering that control and trusting the process. And it has given me a newfound appreciation for my body and my health in ways that I will never take for granted again. I will never take for granted the ability to get out of bed. I will never take for granted the ability to go to the gym. And I remind myself, even though things are definitely challenging right now with a baby at home, I get to go to the gym. I get to get up and drink my water and eat my protein, because there was a time when I couldn't. So I've never been more grateful for the things that used to seem like mundane or tedious tasks to have to do. I'm like, wow, I am so grateful I get to eat this healthy meal, because before I couldn't eat anything.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that's like to go through, where you're so sick, but you're also doing this amazing thing, and you have this baby that you're, so excited for. I just can't imagine it. I mean, my partner and I are starting to talk about having kids, and I'm like, I have that same delusion that I'm like, oh, I'm going to be so cute and, be in the gym pregnant. And I think this is a good reminder that like, that might not go that way.
I think and everyone's experiences are different. Some people have beautiful, healthy, wonderful pregnancies, and so many people, especially. And one of the questions I get a lot, just for anyone listening, my experience with pregnancy had nothing to do with weight loss surgery. You're not at higher risk for hyperemesis because of weight loss surgery. It's pretty rare. I think it's like 3% of pregnancies or something. So I just got real lucky, I guess. But yeah, and one of my reasons for having surgery was, with my PCOS, I was told from the time I was 14, you might not ever have kids. Wow. You might not ever get pregnant. And I was incredibly fortunate that I got pregnant right away. And I know that's a sensitive topic to talk about too, but I firmly believe that the reason I got pregnant, as seamlessly as I did was because of all the work I put into my health. Not just with weight loss surgery, but even being on a GLP-1 the year prior. I really feel like that helped me, get the insulin resistance under control, like get my hormones under control. So I'm so grateful for this journey in so many aspects, because I don't think having my son would even be possible, which he's literally like, it's crazy, like how much things have changed. Like he is just like the best thing that has ever happened. And like, thank God I went through what I went through.
And he's so cute.
Thanks. He's a cutie
He really is so cute.
He's so much fun right now. We started this last week with introducing him to solid food. So I am living my best life, feeding him. Like I've been making him like homemade baby food. So we did carrots and sweet potato. And tonight we tried avocado, and he did not like avocado. I'm so disappointed.
Really?
It's only the first time I have to keep trying it. But he was like just kept like spitting it out. I was like, it's okay, buddy. You don't have to finish it.
Yeah.
But
no, that's fun. And I saw you said he's been sleeping better now that he's eating solid food. So that's a win too.
Well, mostly. We got like a 7-hour stretch the other night after we introduced the food. So it is keeping him fuller, but then it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like last night he was up all night. So I had a little pep talk with him today. I'm like, listen, bud, we were on our walk. We go for our afternoon walk when I'm done working every day. I'm like, listen, mommy has a call tonight at 8:00. She never does evening calls, but you gotta let me be on my call. And I haven't heard screaming or anything. So I think we're good. So I put him to bed before this call, but I was like, listen, I got something to do tonight.
Yeah. Super important podcast.
Yep.
We need to sleep.
But no, he's starting to sleep better, which I always knew sleep was important for health, and I've always preached that, but I never realized just how important sleep was for health and weight loss, because that has been the hardest part with, I feel pretty proud of myself. I've been really great with like my eating. I am back on a GLP-1. Once I got cleared at 6 weeks, I've been back in CrossFit 3 days a week. We go on daily walks. I'm drinking my water. I'm trying to do all the things. Weight loss is slow, but it's happening, and I'm really happy with that. But on the days, like I can't always be consistent with the gym, and on the nights he doesn't sleep, it's like I can't get to the gym the next day. I got 2 hours of sleep last night, and I have a business to run and clients to see, or I have sometimes it's, again, things are still out of my control in certain ways. And I am just grateful that I've already kind of been through that release of control to be able. And this is the biggest thing I preach to my clients, is just being flexible, because in order to be consistent, you have to be flexible. I'm never going to have a perfect routine. There's no such thing, but I'm never going to have ultimate control, at least not in the coming years, over my schedule the way I once did. So I think learning to be as flexible as possible is the best thing moving forward, so that I can keep being consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jamie and I had so much to talk about that we could not fit it into a single episode. So this is the end of part 1 of Jamie's story. She is just an incredible guest, and we talk about so many more amazing things about her story and her journey. So I hope you will come back next week to hear part 2 of her story. If you want to find Jamie on social media, she's at The Sleeved Dietitian. We are at Former Fat Friend Pod. I'm at Maintaining Casey. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode, and I hope you'll come back to hear the rest of Jamie's story in part 2. See you next time.